specialty and
moral.
Like, what is that unique thing that you hold? How then do I know what I can offer, and when do I pull the lever?
Not only you yourself, but then there's also a human touch there, a morale, because you can do whichever methods you want. But then I think at the end of the day, it's also like, can you sit still on that part? Hello everybody, welcome back to a new episode of Henri and Mike. Today is the 4th of August 2022. It is a Thursday. At the moment, it's about 11:07 a.m. in the morning. And welcome to this part of Singapore.
We are at Opera Estate Field. It's near the town of Bedok and Kembangan, in between that.
Yeah.
We came here today because this area is kind of an enclave on itself. You know, there's a lot of like terrace house or bungalows around this area, and behind us, can see behind the tree there's actually a primary school. This place is less well known among the tourists or even Singaporeans as well.
Why is that so?
Mainly because it's just really like it's a private estate on itself. But what's interesting about this place is that most of the places around in this estate, Opera Estate, is literally named related to opera, honestly. Like you can see like Figaro Street, Carmen Street. So this is the kind of name that you have around this area. Fun fact, the first president of Singapore, Mr. Yusof Ishak, the guy that you see on Singapore dollars cash notes, that guy, he essentially stayed here when he was still a journalist before he became the president of Singapore. That was probably back in 1950s. That's something interesting. Just probably a few roads down from where we are currently filming. This is Opera Estate for you.
So if you are in Singapore, you want to take a break from the whole Central District area where most of the landmarks are, you can venture out to the eastern part. There's quite a lot of amenities over here. So like the East Coast Park, Joo Chiat area where we had 2 episodes we filmed over there respectively. So you can also come around this area. It's pretty close actually. You just take the MRT to Kembangan. Right, let's start. Let's get rolling. So Mike, how's the week going?
Well, I was rather busy running errands again the past few days with family members as well as meeting up some friends. How about yours so far?
Mine's okay. I mean, I've been catching a lot of work, booked my ticket to Vietnam. I'll be leaving in 2 weeks' time for a visa run.
Yes.
But definitely we'll talk more about that. At least one filming over there. So I'm heading to Hoi An on the central coast of Vietnam. It'll be pretty exciting to check it out.
Okay.
And apart of that, I've been doing my CrossFit, filming and doing a lot of content. And of course, like the last few days here in the Asia Pacific region, it has been quite bubbling, because Pelosi started her Asian trip, visiting in Singapore first, her first leg, and she moved on to Malaysia. And of course, there was always a debate whether she's going to visit Taiwan, and she did. That was on Wednesday night, I think. And then she stayed in Taiwan for 18 hours before she flew off to South Korea. So I think we'll talk a bit about that today.
Yes.
So I've been following the news on that development in the last, I don't know, like 48 hours.
That's really the biggest highlight this week. The whole newspaper, media,
a lot of coverage on those areas.
So much coverage about
and
that.
Cut across different sectors. Yeah, so that's been happening. So anyway, do you have a word for this week? Like, what do you want to share?
Not really, but I guess the key event so far that I'm thinking about is Nancy Pelosi as well. I think it's one of the biggest issue or topic.
Let's start with something that's a bit more disturbing from my side, is that I keep asking myself, what's her reason to be in Taiwan? I mean, okay, I can understand she wanted to do visiting other Asian states like Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, and Japan. But what's her real purpose of going to Taiwan?
I feel probably it's legacy. You know, she's already 82 years old. She's really like a grandma to us, you know.
She's a grandma.
She is a grandma, in fact. Yeah, she has 5 kids and then she has, I think, nine grandchildren, if I'm not wrong.
So you reckon that it's more for her personal gain? Like she wants to put that milestone on her resume before she move on and she can write an autobiography?
I think that's definitely one angle and one reason for her. She's 82. She entered the politics when she was 47. So it has been a good like 30-40 years of her entire political career. This is definitely her last one before the midterms election in November. Be whether she's going to continue in her political career, that's kind of like a legacy for herself, for her entire career so far. So I think that's on a personal level or professional level for her. But at the same time, because she's
Democrat.
Yeah, she's a Democrat. So she's definitely helping the Democrat Party to garner some votes right now, trying to bring attention to the space in the Asia Pacific, or rather Indo-Pacific area. And that's probably going to have some impact on the midterm elections as well, which is just maybe like 3 or 4 months away. So I think that's also another thing helping the election. US politics, there's a lot of lobbying. So I think this time around when she's around in Asia, other than foreign policy, she also met up with business community. So particularly in Taiwan, I think she met up with TSMC's CEO, Mark Liu. Yeah, so I think that also helps in pushing agenda. So you cut across her professional career, business community, at the same time also for her political party.
She has everything planned out because upon arrival in Taiwan, she released that her opinions post article through the Washington Post just 10 minutes after her arrival, and then followed by 3 tweets kind of explaining her decision, the reason why she's there in Taiwan. I think largely it can be classified into 3 different categories. So economic, governance, and security. So obviously, economic-wise, there's a company in Taiwan that has a very huge, like a giant weight in the whole global scene. It's called TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Corporation. It's listed in Taiwan, also in New York, I think. And they have about, 430 billion market capitalization. It's huge. And what they really focus on is the semiconductor chips and the finished products. The whole world depends a lot on this company in terms of chip, because just take out your iPhone or your Android phone, like medical equipments, fighter jets, they all require this kind of very highly advanced technology. When you look at it, it has always been the case, both the US and China has been like indirectly asking this TSMC company to choose a side. When you look at their sales from last year, 2021, 65% of the sales are to North American markets.
Okay.
And Chinese markets, like to mainland China, has reduced from 20% to 10%. So the numbers already show where TSMC kind of have their preference. But having said that, TSMC also has a huge consumption, so to say, in mainland China, because mainland China, they're also very huge in semiconductor, but their supply chain is more on the unfinished products. So which means once they finish that, they have to pass it on to TSMC to do the final finished product part. So that to some extent is very important, and Pelosi actually met, as you mentioned, Mark Liu. So that's why that's the weight there, you see. Also, of course, you have the governance part. You're talking about the whole democratic relationship, what the US shared with Taiwan. And of course, there's a part that angered a lot from the Chinese side. And that's why 18 hours stay for her, for Pelosi. And right after she left, the Chinese side started their military drill. So which started today, 4th of August, and will last to 7th of August. This time round, compared to 1996, it's all around Taiwan, 6 different zones. And they even cut into the Taiwanese sea, Taiwanese water territory. So in some way, China is already punishing Taiwan. And that's why I asked myself, what is the real purpose for Pelosi to actually do that? Yes, of course, she mentioned about economic reason. She mentioned about governance reason. She mentioned about security reason. Totally understand. Yeah, that's her own interest, political party, her own economic interest for the US. But then she said that no matter what, US will stand with Taiwan. How does it actually work when you use the word stand with and solidarity? Because when you look at how the US has done previously, like for instance, Ukraine's, they are still going on. The EU and the US say that they will stand with the Ukraine. So they have been selling weapons, giving weapons, sending it to the Ukrainian side. And that's what they define as to stand with. I don't know, in Taiwanese perspective, Taiwanese scene in this case, how will the American actually extend out their hand? Because the interests are very real, are very different here. Yeah, you see, also it's difficult for the Taiwanese side to say no for the US visit, because any of the visit from foreign country to Taiwan will be welcome in some way or the other.
Yeah.
Because Taiwan has been a very isolated island or nation in this state, in this sense, because the whole world recognized one China policy. So I just keep questioning what's the purpose of Pelosi. But Pelosi's purpose in this case, you can just summarize out to the interest. There is a huge interest in Taiwan or around that region. That's why she's visiting, or she has visited. From the geopolitical situation to the economic interest to the political interest. So Taiwan, to be seen, is just a chess battleground between China and the US. So who's going to pay the price? Obviously, it's the 23 million of Taiwanese people living on the island that's going to pay the price for it. So on one hand, it's so challenging for Taiwanese to give out the way of our life. You were born in that island, you were born in that environment, and you grew up in that environment, and you're so used to the way of life, like democratic way of life, whereby free speech is so important. Everything is like, progressively. And for the Taiwanese people, this has come a very long way. We didn't start off like that. That's where we are today. To some extent, I feel bad for people who are in Taiwan. No doubt that it is important, you protect what you value. And by protecting that, to some extent, you have to shape blood. How do you look at this? I mean, it's very complicated. For people who are not from the region, especially not from Taiwan, it's very hard, like, especially when you have that family ties still there on the island. How would you say, like, China can just walk into it and take everything over? And then they keep arguing that it's called an independence part, but Taiwan has always been there since 1911. Why do we need to talk about independence? We are already existing. It's just different narrative being placed upon us. You got
I think it really depends on which angle you're looking at. If you speak to Taiwanese generally, the angle that you just mentioned will probably be the narrative. If you speak to a mainland Chinese, the way they look at it is also different. That has a lot to do with how the central government of People's Republic of China actually set up the narrative for them, and then generations that come after that believe in it. Two different narratives results in the different China that is out there, but a lot of countries and states around the world recognize the People's Republic of China, like what you mentioned, in terms of economic front, and also the sheer power and influence they have on that. I think it's a complicated look into history, and I don't think it's going to be that easy to change. The starting point is already different. It's just like if you could look at the way that the Japanese way of looking at their own history and how South Korea, Taiwan, or even China looks at Japan's history, it's always debatable.
I don't disagree with the history part because there's a lot to do with the US and also the Chinese part too, how it evolved to this date. But what I'm saying is that who's paying the price at the end of the day? Look at Ukraine, it's the Ukrainian people. Look at Taiwan, it will be the Taiwanese people to pay that price for Pelosi's visit, in this case. I'm just thinking, like, if China really take over, either forcefully through military might or through economic, because economic sanction restarted, do you think that you can live in the Chinese society by giving out your voices, like, censored, because that's their way of life? Can you imagine that? I mean, personally, I can't.
Okay.
Like, you just gotta be silenced, be shut up, or be disappeared because you do not follow their way of thoughts, their ideology. Because in Taiwan, like, when you look at this event, Pelosi's visit, most of the Taiwanese on the island, they are very calm. They carry on their life as it is, because this is not the first time that China has been doing that to us. In some indirect way, the US has done that too, for the last 80 years. So it's very normal. You constantly have this kind of Chinese, so to say, threat towards the Taiwanese. That's why since the 80s, you see a lot of different small Taiwanese family. They all left Taiwan for overseas, like to the US, to Canada, to Singapore, to the UK, to different European states, or to Australia and New Zealand, because the parents want to have a different future for their kids. I mean, that's partially what the reason for us that we came to Singapore as well. Our parents brought us here to receive different education system, like the English-based education system, and have a more world perspective. I'm not sure for you, but for me, it's a very emotional in the sense that I still feel that emotional tie, like family ties over there. But at the same time, you also look at it in a different angle. Another question is whether the US is doing the right thing. There's a book by James Bradley called The China Mirage, and he basically talked about the history, how the US failed in the whole China and Asia states. So it started to talk about the 1852, the China Exclusion Act in the States, whereby they exclude or they prevent immigration of Chinese laborers into the state, mostly the western part, to help them to develop the area over there in the 17th century. 1852. Having said that, it excludes the teachers, the merchants, and the medical staff. But then, of course, when you have that kind of act being introduced, obviously this caused a racial divides, right? So a lot of Chinese background people back then, they are being excluded. You can Google and search for those posters and those acts, just disgusting, in our today's eyes. And then you also lead to the 1880s opium trade in Hong Kong, China.
That's actually very
that
defining.
Eventually lead up to the war of the 8 nations that looted, for instance, different part of China, especially in Shanghai. I think it's called Jimingyou. We can definitely put a link there. Even to this day, the Chinese government still use that as it's not a narrative, it's a fact to argue that China needs to be standing together, firm. And all these things, what they have been doing, in some way or the other, they also learn from the imperialists, from the European power. How the British, the French, the German, the Dutch, they went around the world to establish those trading ports. But at the same time, what did they also do?
So it's kind of like imperialism and colonization, right? Yeah, there's a huge
So China
part of
basically
that.
follow that through, and then that's why you see what's happening to Taiwan, to Hong Kong, to Xinjiang, and then to the whole, to Tibet, and to the whole of this South China Sea, different little islands. And that's where we are today. I don't know, I think what good thing about Taiwan is also the people fought so hard throughout history, and then to get to where we are today, to have the democratic states. And you can definitely argue whether democracy is a good thing or bad thing. But at least since young, it trained us to have different sources of information, because it can be fake news, it can be dominated by different political parties, but you have that resources, the informations are open for you to actually look at them, read them, listen to them, but you are being trained to have that conclusion by yourself, like which one do you lean more towards. In our growing up, there's always different voices there, and you're trained to this kind of equal rights and the women's rights as well. You know, we have like a female president who's leading the country right now. Yeah, I think that's Pelosi. But I think having said all that, and most of the Western media coverage is about war, whether a war will take place. That's what people are worried about. I think that's what the media, they care about, because they give them coverage. But at the same time, when you look at this military drill, it will not be just to the 7th of August. I do think they will carry on a bit more, because Xi Jinping himself, he has like a election coming out in November. So somehow he needs to stabilize what's happening in his own country, so he can make sure that he wins that election in November. So in a way that he's showing to his people that, hey, China is very powerful. This is what we are doing to Taiwan. We're going to get it back, and we are not afraid of the American.
There is definitely a complicated topic, when it comes to US, China, and with Taiwan involved where we came from. I mean, for many years, there are just so many different things that happen, and I think up until today, I don't really have a very firm stand about it. But what I'm more intrigued is by the way that these three nations, they try their best to further their own interests. So it's more about the foreign policy aspect of things, how they negotiate and slowly work through this thing and try to garner the best resource for themselves.
Okay, let's go deeper. Let's look at Pelosi. Even though she has done that, but what can we learn from her?
I think from a leadership perspective, she knows how to navigate within domestic scene itself. Like she is the head of the House of Representatives. So she is
third in line in the whole American political power,
after president and the vice president.
Yeah.
Yes. White House essentially is the executive arm of the entire country, right? But for House of Representatives and the Senate, they are like legislative. In fact, before Pelosi wants to come to Taiwan to include as part of the entire Asia trip, White House did a lot of things. Actually, this is not the first time this news came up. She wanted to come to Asia as part of a tour sometime in April this year, but she has COVID back then, so she put that aside. Maybe that was just an excuse or whatnot. But she tried to navigate the entire space because it's a very delicate topic as well in US, especially after Russia and Ukraine's ongoing war right now. US is trying to support Ukraine, so a lot of people are saying that yes, there's this act in US, the Taiwan Act, right? So whether they should support, what Pelosi did was really trying to pull through that. I thought that from leadership perspective, that's quite bold, because from her perspective, if she is the House of Representatives, she has her own free will to also progress the interests of the House in terms of foreign policy. Therefore, she is in Asia right now. And the consequence of that is who's supposed to bear the consequence, which is actually the Biden administration.
I mean, when I listen to what you just mentioned, it is not leadership, it's more like power. How she navigate her power, use what she has, her status to do what she wants. And if let's say you're talking about golden nuggets, like to take away the interest part, it's just the power. The power you have will actually help you to do things, to get things done, be it in a political sense or be in a business perspective.
Yeah, that's why I started off by saying that she knows her scope well. She knows when she should pull the lever at the right time, because even for timing wise, it's also important. You see, when she came to this area, she announced 4 countries officially: Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, and Japan. Taiwan was never in it. But look at what has happened after just 2 stops. Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan came up, and that occupies almost the entire Indo-Pacific agenda. Smart. And what she did in Taiwan, the moment she landed, the embargo was lifted for all the news to be released. She gave the 3 tweets that you talked about.
I agree on the leadership part, but what it takes to become a good leader in that case, because then that will have the moral impact inside. To make China great again is at the expense of 23 million of Taiwanese people's livelihood. So as a Taiwanese, like 23 million of Taiwanese, of course this is something that you don't want to see, but then what are other golden nuggets you learn? I mean, the most obvious one I see is TSMC in this case, because you see like Biden just signed this bill about 52 billion USD for the Chips and Science Act to be rolled out in the States. The Senate needs to pass that first, right? They need to do that, which I think it will, because it boosts the American economy, but at the same time also diversify the dependence on this Taiwanese company, right?
Right.
So when I look at it, I think if you want to succeed in either politics or business-wise, you want to have that power. The only thing is that money talks, right? How do you make sure that you have that power? Make yourself not replaceable by others. And that's how you do it, regardless of your moral issue, whatever it is. When you have that market share, when you have that power, you're the one who call the shot. And that's why Pelosi set time to meet with Mark Liu in this case, apart from the president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen.
So essentially it's what currency, right? Do you have the hard currency or do you utilize your soft currency? I think it's very apparent like US and China has that hard currency, the military might. For Taiwan, they might not have as strong of a military presence, but they have a lot of soft power as well.
I think that's 2 points. Taiwanese part, they have their military reserve and also the equipment stuff, but compared to China and US, it's nothing comparable. So the second point is that you talk about hard currency or soft currency. Yes, no doubt that Taiwan has the soft currency, but how effective is that? It really depends on your hard currency. For the US and China, they have the hard currency, which means they call the shots, and the rest of the people will listen to their diplomacy.
Through this discussion, I kind of know like from leadership when I first mentioned about Pelosi, I realized more being more strategic. You know when to utilize your resource, and you need to know your resource, the currency, very well. Like what is that unique thing that you hold? Because you look at Taiwan is not represented in a lot of international organizations. So the government official will not be able to engage on the same platform as other nations, right? A lot of times, Taiwanese government will send private sector leaders. Maurice Zhang Zhongmo was one of them. So he will be the one who represent. But why him? It goes back to the soft power, right? TSMC. He's highly linked to the semiconductor industry, which is the crux of Taiwanese economy in terms of manufacturing and the finished product. You mentioned at the start of this is to sell to the US 65% of their market share last year. So you know that like what you're strong. For Singapore, it's very similar. What do we have? We only have some kind of talent. We don't have any other resources, to be honest. We do have a military, but like I mentioned just now, we can't compete. So then what do we do as a price taker?
To apply that strategic move, it comes down to you yourself first, like individually and also governmental, like national level first. Sun Tzu, right? So this Chinese military general from the past, he had written a book in the past called Sun Tzu Bing Fa, The Art of War.
The Art of War.
Yeah,
one
of the sentences is very famous, like 知人知己,百战百胜. To win the 100 battles or multiple battles, what you need to do is to understand yourself first. Once you understand yourself first, you will understand your enemies. And by doing that, you can analyze the person properly, and then you can implement a strategy and to make sure that you win. And this can come across in different things, like the way you communicate. Is it direct manner or indirect manner, and how you play that game, you see. So most of the Western media and then people around me are asking, like, would there be a war? If it happens, right? I mean, this is just how the reality is. But then as an individual, what can we do better? Like really, what can we do better? You just understand each other, see each other as a person. I think that is a very good start. But the question is whether we are able to do that in a large scale. That really depends on us as human beings. Not only education system, how you're being taught, but at the same time, also you as an individual, whether you're willing to cross over to do that, you see. Like it's just basically weighing the interests and morale side, I think.
Yeah. So through this conversation, I do have a word.
What's the word?
Specialty. You need to know your niche, your specialty. What you can offer given the context of the reality that I'm living. How then do I know what I can offer, and when do I pull the lever to activate this?
Specialty can go with different things. Not only you yourself to understand your interests, your goal, but at the same time your strengths and weaknesses. But then there's also a human touch there, a morale, because when you are trying to achieve your interests, sometimes it can be 不择手段. You can do whichever methods you want to do it. Merciless, you can be straightforward, you can be hard on that kind of people. But then I think at the end of the day, it's also like your moral side, your moral value. Can you sit still and sit tight on that part?
Can you sleep at night?
Most of people say yes, they can sleep at night. But I think at the end of your life, when you look back, that's the question you should ask yourself. Everyone answered it differently. I think we can conclude that this episode with these two words, don't you think?
Specialty and
moral.
Moral.
What Pelosi's incident taught us.
What we can learn from the grandma.
What's up, Pelosi? And for that, still, Next time we're in Singapore, you're welcome, to drop by this area. There's a cafe down the road called what? Baker and
Cook.
We were just there grabbing some espresso. Delicious, really proper bread. So with that, we conclude our episode, Specialty and Moral, for this episode. And thank you very much for your time and your attention and your love. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment.
Don't forget to smile. Be kind to everyone.
Be kind
Keep
to yourself.
each other company.
Exactly.
We will see you in the next episode.
All right. Take care. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Community.
Okay.
Try to spare our camera.
War of
The
art.
war of art. One of the famous
the art of war, sorry.
The art of war. The art of war.
The art of war.